Power-ups, otherwise known as superforms, are a fairly common trope in modern media. The name is pretty self-explanatory. It's when a character achieves a new level of power previously untapped, be it through internal or external forces that grants them the strength they need to overcome a challenge. A character's superform is usually meant to be the absolute height of their power, a game changer and a problem solver, usually accompanied by a hefty dose of fanfare. Dramatic music, swelling energy, varying degrees of collateral damage just from activating the form. You get the idea. Of course, I'm sure you all are familiar enough with the concept. Honestly, I love a good super form myself. The pure hype you get from watching a character go beyond their limits and achieve the strength they need to surmount a previously insurmountable threat never gets old. Or does it? For as epic as the superform is, there are some franchises out there that abuse the trope to the point of redundancy, trying to recapture the same hype that viewers might have gotten the first time around, usually with diminishing returns. Now, before we go any further, I have to make one thing abundantly clear. I'm not trying to diss on anyone's favorite series, franchise, or character. This is not me griping about the actual quality of any show, game, book, or manga, but rather pointing out examples that I think misuse the superform trope. That doesn't mean the story in and of itself is bad or that you're dumb for liking it. Just that I think the property in question mishandles power-ups as a concept. So, with all that out of the way, let's continue. When we talk about superforms, one of the first things to pop into most people's heads is Dragon Ball. The Super Saiyan transformation is by far one of the most iconic in all of fiction. First unlocked by Goku in his battle with the cosmic tyrant Frieza, this was a legendary power that only one Saiyan could achieve every 1,000 years or so. Supposedly. It was unleashed by Goku in a moment of rage after witnessing the death of one of his closest friends, and represented the long overdue retribution of a proud warrior race so viciously murdered by Frieza when he destroyed their planet. And then Toriyama started giving everyone with even a speck of Saiyan blood in them the power to achieve this form, slowly diminishing the impact of how special the original Super Saiyan transformation felt, while also making every non-Saiyan character increasingly irrelevant to the story. He also had to keep artificially escalating the power scaling by introducing villains that were just arbitrarily stronger than the last main antagonist, to the point where we've got baddies who can blow up entire galaxies, so Frieza's genocide of planets looks like child's play. But, of course, the Saiyan characters would find a way to keep up with this ever-rising power ceiling by unlocking stronger and stronger versions of the Super Saiyan, meaning that original transformation on Namek was also kind of child's play in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, Super Saiyans are a whole issue unto themselves, but they also perfectly encapsulate the idea of redundant power-ups. I mean, when you actually stop and think about it, it's kind of impossible to even properly portray the escalation they represent. Like, this giant energy blast from Super Saiyan 1 isn't strong enough to kill the new Big Bad, but this near-identical giant energy blast from Super Saiyan 2 is... because number go up. The original Super Saiyan form was already capable of moving faster than the eye can see, and every subsequent version is supposed to be faster than that, but it's extremely difficult to communicate that when the audience still has to be able to see the fight. A character moving so quickly that they appear to blink in and out of existence or leave after images kinda looks the same no matter what. But let's move on from Super Saiyans to another form that was inspired by them, Supersonic. Supersonic was a power-up introduced in, of course, the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. It's been a mainstay of the series ever since, a form achieved when Sonic absorbs the power of all 7 Chaos Emeralds. It grants him a number of perks, such as increased strength, flight, and 9 vulnerability, But the biggest benefit is that it takes Sonic's iconic speed and allows him to move even faster. Over the years, other characters in the Sonic franchise have gotten super forms as well. They typically take on the same basic principles as Super Sonic, giving everyone the same general power set, but enhancing the character's most notable abilities. Super Shadow, for example, is able to wield even stronger versions of his iconic Chaos powers, while Super Silver's psychokinesis is buffed to the point that he can move and lift things on a far grander scale. Burning Blaze, which is technically different but still fundamentally the same concept, enhances her pyrokinesis. However, beyond even the super form is the fabled hyper form, a transformation that Sega hasn't used since Sonic 3. This form is, as you guessed, effectively an even better and stronger variant of Super Sonic. It allows for all the same enhancements, plus the added benefit of a screen nuke. Fans have been clamoring for the return of Hypersonic for decades, but Sega has been reluctant to give it to them for fear of the power creep this form implies. I mean, Supersonic already goes up against godlike entities on the regular. What sort of multiverse breaking threat would even be warranted for something like Hypersonic in the first place? There's also the fact that Sonic, even in his super form, often ends up needing the help of his friends and allies to take down the main antagonist of any given entry. If we allow him to go hyper, then what's left for the rest of the cast to do but stand on the sidelines as glorified cheerleaders? I'm not even necessarily saying that Hypersonic should never come back or that it's inherently a bad idea, but you'd have to be very careful with how you handle it. Once that can of worms is opened up again, it's going to be very hard to close. Now, it would be remiss of me to talk about Hypersonic and not also bring up Cyber Supersonic, aka Supersonic 2, from Frontiers. This is technically not a new form or transformation. It's just supersonic, but with the addition of cyber energy on top of chaos energy. The only change physically is the eye color, but this additional power was deemed necessary for the fight against the End in the game's true ending. I know this might seem a little controversial, but I wasn't overly impressed with this form. It basically hits most of the issues that I talked about before, as the final boss is effectively just like every other boss fight in Frontiers, with the only real change being the addition of a perfect parry. I'll grant that it's a more satisfying conclusion from a gameplay standpoint than the random bullet hell final boss in the normal ending, but narratively, it puts everyone else on the sidelines with their only contributions being to hold up a barrier and fire a gun at the very end. Like, the true ending of Frontiers would have been the perfect opportunity to give Super Tails, Super Knuckles, and Super Amy their long overdue 3D debuts. Sure, they do play a role in helping Sonic rid himself of the cyber corruption, allowing him to achieve this form in the first place, and I'll grant that that is a contribution. However, it still feels like Sonic's friends got the short end of the stick in this one. Ultimately, I guess giving all the power to a single character and letting them solo the problem is just far less interesting to me than a finale in which all the main characters get to contribute. That being said, there are examples of enhanced super forms that I do think work fairly well. One such example has to be the Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry. Now, DT is a power that's been retroactively expanded upon since its first appearance back in the original DMC, but I think as a whole it's handled fairly well. Devil Trigger is an ability used by half-demon characters to enhance their natural abilities. They generally take on a more monstrous appearance while gaining boosts to, of course, their strength, speed, and already absurd durability and regeneration. Devil Trigger also has a sort of enhanced form, called Sin Devil Trigger. As you'd expect, this is basically Devil Trigger again, but even stronger. That said, I think Sin Devil Trigger actually works a bit better because of the narrative behind it. To start with, Devil Trigger is already established to change and evolve along with its wielders. It works not just as a power-up in the story, but also a reflection of a character's growth. To that end, Sin Devil Trigger usually manifests as a conclusion or culmination of a character's arc. Dante first unlocks Sin Devil Trigger at the end of the first game, when he embraces his legacy as the son of the Dark Knight Sparta and defeats his family's ancient nemesis, Mundus. Sin Devil Trigger technically also appears in DMC 2, but it's treated as more of an Easter egg in that game rather than having any real story significance. In truth, the Sin variant doesn't properly appear again until DMC 5, when Dante once again has to resolve some family matters with his brother Virgil. Speaking of whom, Virgil also acquires a Sin variant in the finale, after his human and demon halves recombine. At this point, both Dante and Virgil can freely use Sin Devil Trigger whenever they want, which symbolizes the full and total completion of their character arcs. Dante has finally wrapped up the one loose thread that remained from his past by confronting and making peace with his brother, while Virgil seems to have finally acquired a motivation to fight beyond his blind lust for power. Even Nero, who doesn't have a Sin variant yet, gains an evolved Devil Trigger during the finale to help him bring an end to the sibling rivalry. So what can we glean from all of this? In essence, enhanced superforms are a risky plot device to play around with. If handled poorly, they result in a character or handful of characters becoming overpowered and outshining the rest of the cast. If one wishes to explore this premise, then they need to set clear boundaries as to when, where, and most importantly why an enhanced superform becomes available or even necessary. Another possibility to explore is the idea of alternative superforms, which grant enhancements in one area but not so much in others. This allows for a hero to be more strategic with their transformations, and also makes it easier to retain the hype factor. Like, during one intense battle, a character may unlock a form that enhances their raw strength, but another fight sees them against an opponent that can't be defeated through brute force alone. Having the same or even a different character acquiring a form that boosts speed instead may be the key to turning the tide. Different transformations suited to different scenarios is, in my opinion, a much more tactful approach than just stacking the same buffs on top of one another over and over again. Ultimately, power-ups in general can be a surprisingly tricky affair to handle in writing. The first time one makes an appearance can be a great way to drum up hype, but overutilization can quickly cause the hype to give way to redundancy. In my personal opinion, a story that needs to keep escalating the stakes and power levels to remain engaging can come off as rather shallow, and enhanced superforms are practically the embodiment of that issue. But what do you all think? How do you feel about the idea of enhanced superforms? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.